As I put it on my Snapchat story, bingo. Union Pacific 1943, the Spirit of the Union Pacific, was creating a lot of buzz that day as it was going to lead an X-209 out of Walbridge, Ohio, originally profiled for Jacksonville, Florida. However, it ended up only running to Louisville, and we found it first off a Lucky Road next to Walbridge Yard in, Walbridge, Ohio. We were only there for about 5 minutes when we got word that NS 1072, the Illinois Terminal Heritage Unit, had just passed Oak Harbor on a one-off intermodal train for Detroit. Normally, the intermodals that go to Detroit do not take the Chicago line. This one was. We made it to Vickers Junction in time to find the 1072 parked and another train passing it. It was at this moment I realized I forgot to turn Do Not Disturb on my phone as I got an incoming phone call and interrupted my video recording. Oh well, back to the diamond we go at Vickers as CSX I-132 showed up out of nowhere with a duo of Union Pacific AC-44 CWs. 132 comes off the Union Pacific and doesn't look much like itself today as it is all stacks, with no manifest in the consist whatsoever. Finally, NS I-73, the extra 273 that was heading for Detroit with NS 1072 trailing, finally showed up at Vickers. Note the Wash Me Now markings on the sides of the nose of NS 1072. The unit is filthy and quite frankly needs new paint, as it looks like some of it's melting off. Our next contestant at Vickers is an eastbound sand train with an SD70 IAC and 2 Canadian Pacific AC-44 CWs for power. Our last train in Vickers is a foreign power catch with a BNSF duo, a Dash 9 and ES-44 DC for power leading this one, with a nice horn show from the crew. It was around this moment that we learned that X-209 was going to go via Perrysburg, and 1943 would be trailing. We still were dedicated to see it though, and we decided to run for Deschler. And oh boy, was that a good idea. We arrive in Deschler to find a stopped eastbound manifest sitting on the southeast Y. However, we don't have time for this as a westbound I-171 with BNSF power was bearing down on Deschler. was then time for the eastbound manifest to take its turn. This eastbound manifest is CSX M560. I realized then, at that moment, that I was hearing another horn, and landed probably the coolest shot of the day. The eastbound intermodal was CSX I-116. A few old Pan Am and Main Central boxcars were toward the rear of the train, and then the end of the train came around the southeast Y in Bachelor. After this train, we made a beeline for Fostoria, where we heard 1943 was coming toward soon, and we did manage to grab a few trains there while we were waiting for 1943. We start with the westbound I-009 heading for CSX's giant Bedford Park, Illinois intermodal yard. It was at this moment that I started hearing horns on the Norfolk Southern, which made me think that L11 was coming back. And bingo, would you look at that. Didn't film all of 009 just to make sure to get this shot of L11, which I believe is a local out of Findlay that runs to Bellevue and works Fostoria in the process. All covered hoppers today with a solo SD40E doing the honors. Now, for those who don't remember, we are out for 1943, and we finally heard it at 7 p.m. on the dot, calling the signals for the northern part of Fostoria. And finally, at 7:20 p.m., here came X209 with UP 1943 actually leading. It went out the south part of Walbridge instead of via Perrysburg, and leading solo. This was a big train. Like, took 14 minutes for it to pass big, so you're definitely not seeing the full video. For those who have never seen or heard of UP 1943, this engine is truly something else. Union Pacific went to town on this locomotive, creating the ultimate saluting our troops / honoring our veterans locomotive. This locomotive is painted in all 5 branches of the military. The silver for the Air Force, the red and blue stripe for the Coast Guard, the gray for the Navy, and the camouflage for Army and Marines. The number 1943 and the Spirit of the Union Pacific banner and name that the engine has is dedicated to the bomber that Union Pacific named via war grants during World War II. The bomber was a B-17 bomber. It was ultimately shot down during World War II, somewhere in the Pacific, if I remember correctly. As always on 209, the majority of the train was autoracks. I will say this, all, and I mean all of the rail fans that we came across that were after the 1943 were all very kind and very considerate, which doesn't always happen when you're on the chase of a special interest or heritage unit. People were always giving updates. We're telling people what shots they had planned so people knew not to be in their shots. We had also informed people of what we had planned in Fostoria in terms of our shots. And I think with that, it was a great effort by the guys out there. And for once, a drama-free outing. 209 was so big that it had a mid-train DPU. This was the other Union Pacific engine that was paired with it in Wallbridge that we saw earlier. .209 ended up passing for another whole 5 minutes, with a Union Pacific autorack bringing up the end of the train, ironically. However, we did know that we had an eastbound and a westbound right on 1943's ass coming up. The eastbound didn't take too long to show up. It was CSX I-116, which we saw earlier in Deschler with a new crew on board that got on in North Baltimore. Our westbound then showed up, CSX I-137, Baltimore, Ohio, to Bedford Park, Illinois, intermodal. Originally, 137 would always run with single stacks. Now that the Howard Street Tunnel construction is well underway, this train is finally up to double, which is great because the Port of Baltimore wants intermodal trains to serve its docks. It was then time to start heading back toward the barn, but any trip to Ohio would always warrant a stop at good old Millbury, CP 281 on the Chicago line, where we happened to catch an eastbound 264, 47th Street Yard in Chicago to Ayer, Massachusetts on what used to be Pan Am. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see y'all on the next one. At CP 281 on the Norfolk Southern Chicago line in Millbury, Ohio, this is Michigan Rail Fan Films signing off.